So I went and lived there for 6 months in early 1991, the first half of 1991, to look at this process close hand. What was it like to be in a country where free study of history had been totally forbidden for about 70 years, and now suddenly it was allowed? And it was a fascinating experience, because what I found, as you might expect, was that the people who were doing the most interesting work, the most interesting research, writing, speaking, filmmaking about this, they were not people in the Soviet academic world, because their universities were filled with party hacks who had tenure and would be there for years to come. Rather, it was happening more informally outside the academic world by people who were doing this on their own, usually having day jobs doing something else. A great many of them were affiliated with a national organization which had sprung up once this became possible, called Memorial, headquartered in Moscow but with branches throughout the country. A wonderful organization. Some people who were in it were human rights activists, some were survivors of the old Gulag, some were younger people who had lost family members, during the Stalin years and after. And all were people who were fiercely dedicated to looking at that previously forbidden history and examining it close up. And there were historians within Memorial who were looking at different aspects of it. One group of them was trying to construct a map of where all of these hundreds of prison camps had been. Some of them were zeroing in on particular camps. Some of them were writing about writers who had perished during the Stalin years. One man was researching camp rebellions. Who were these people? For the most part, they were people whose day jobs, who as their day jobs, they were scientists. Why? Because during the Soviet years, science was the one area where you could really be free to do research without these sort of strictures of certain things only certain things could be discussed and investigated and found out. So really, a lot of the freest spirits went into the world of science. And when I was with these people, it was usually a scientist I was with, a physicist, for example. I remember sitting in his apartment in Moscow and looking through pages and pages of old records from a labor camp where he had found one summer traveling in the wilds of northern Siberia an abandoned prison camp with some of the paperwork still intact in file drawers, and he had brought it home and he was trying to reconstruct what had happened at this place and who had been there. He'd taken photographs. He was a physicist. It was another scientist who, in the Siberian city of Krasnoyarsk, took me to my first mass grave. One of the things that was happening in Russia during this period in the late 1980s, early 1990s, was the uncovering of some 300 mass graves around the country. And I remember at this particular one, and again it was a scientist whom I was with, you could reach down and pick up out of the earth one dirt-yellowed skull after another with a bullet hole through the forehead. An extraordinary sense of being somewhere where 60 years of history was collapsed into an instant and you could just hold it in your hand. Very sadly, in Russia today, a lot of repression and restrictions are coming back when it comes to the study of history. Vladimir Putin said recently, and I'm quoting him, that history books in schools should cultivate in young people a feeling of pride in their country. This has meant that the school curriculum has been changed, and it also meant that a little over a year ago in St. Petersburg, the local office of Memorial was raided by police in camouflage uniforms and ski masks. What did they take? They took 11 computer hard drives containing just this kind of material that I was talking about, archives, letters, oral histories, and so forth from 60 years ago. It's a reminder that practicing public history in many parts of the world is still a dangerous thing to do.